Femi, over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Imran. And once again, a great thanks and appreciation to everyone for spending the time with us here today. We promise that we're going to make it experiential. We're going to make it something you take away and have a transformation, a personal life transformation. We know you've just spent some time in the breakout room. Can everyone see my screen, please, before I make an assumption that you can see it? Everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
We would like
Yeah.
everyone this time to go into a breakout room and undertake a personal activity. Well, let's see, there are 30 people, I think. So we can have 4 people in each breakout room. We want to spend 20 minutes doing something very, very collaborative, okay? And here's the ask. If we can have 4 people to each breakout room, if we can go in for 10 minutes, and in that 10-minute period, we'd like you to, first of all, self-organize and identify who you want to be the speaker for your room. So that when we come back to this main room, we're going to spend another 10 minutes debriefing the discussion you had. Now, what are you going to be discussing? The activity is very, very simple. Changing behaviors. Every single one of us experiences change at one point in our daily lives or another without even realizing it. What we don't sometimes appreciate is how we respond to those changing circumstances or changing situations that warrant or changes in our behavior. So we'd like you to go into a breakout room, please, and have a discussion around how do you respond to change at work, number one. Then number 2, how do you actually put yourself in a situation where you react differently to changes outside of work environment? So in the first instance, responding to change at work. Secondly, how do you react differently? What is that shift outside of a work environment? So 10 minutes now. As true, I was going to say agilists, but not everyone here may be agilists. As 2 practitioners in whatever practice we have, we ensure that we keep to our time box. So we are going to be strictly time boxing this event. 10 minutes in the breakout room, please. And it will be appreciated if everyone can kindly go into the breakout room, apart from the facilitators, of course. So at the end of 10 minutes, we come back and we want to have a maximum playback time of 10 minutes. So if we have 5 breakout rooms, it means that each breakout room would have 2 minutes to debrief. You don't have to use the 2 minutes. Keep it brief, keep it succinct. So when we're ready to go, can we open the breakout rooms again, please?
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for spending time together. What we want to do now is just hear from whoever would like to share. I think we had 5 breakout rooms, so if we can keep it to 2 minutes, please. And this will be on a voluntary basis. Whoever would like to go first. Mary.
Yeah, we talked about how change can feel like it is imposed within a work environment, and whereas outside a work environment, it feels more like you're in control. We talked about how it's an emotional journey and how different people will be at different places in that journey, and how as coaches, we have to be sensitive to that. We talked about that. We also talked about ourselves, about how some of us like change. We are early adopters of change. We are risk takers, and we will try something. I'm definitely a risk taker. I want to know what's going on everywhere. So yeah, we talked about that. I don't have to use the whole 2 minutes. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Okay, who'd like to go next?
I'm happy to go next.
Thank you. Tara, I would like to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So with regards to change at work, we discussed that really need to assess the impact first, whether it's a positive change, a negative change, if it's small or large change. And we discussed that if it's a negative change, really we want to seek further clarification, potentially negotiate to lessen the negative impact of that change and provide feedback, and maybe meet halfway. Basically, it's all kind of accepting that we need to be flexible and obviously agile. That's why we're here, and adaptable. And then when it came more to outside of work, we discussed that it's probably need to do a deep analysis, assessment of the situation, because obviously it impacts more directly, it's more personal, and yeah, it's probably the same as a previous speaker. Sorry, missed your name. Yeah. Sorry, I forgot my point now. That's what happens when you have 4 hours sleep. That's all we had.
Thank you, Tara. Awesome. Thank you very much. Who'd like to go next?
Okay. Go for it, Duncan.
I'll put on here. Look, I'm talking to you for example. Printer.
Okay.
So,
Duncan?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we talked about, well, a couple of immediate reactions. Someone mentioned fear when they talked about, politics of change and it being imposed in the workplace. We talked a little bit about the good old Kubler-Ross curve and how we might move through those stages of shock, denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance. And then we talked a bit about, Dina was talking about how she, an example of her sort of advocating for a team, and where there was something being imposed on the team, what she did was help that team get their voices heard, so at least be able to try and influence on what was happening to them and have their input, so their voices were heard, and recognise that was a good thing. We talked about people's personal response, sometimes, especially in the personal environment, that we might think the worst naturally about the change and maybe have to dig a little bit deeper to get to the benefits. And then we talked about maybe with personal change, it might be, we might be a bit more emotional because it's happening to us in a slightly different setting, whereas in the workplace we might use some of the tools and techniques, and we might be helping others through change because of the roles that we have, whereas with personal change, potentially it might be impacting us more directly. So, but we talk about wanting to use some of those tools in our personal life that we perhaps use in our professional life.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have anyone else?
Yeah, Femi, I'll go if that's okay.
Oh yes, please go, Mike.
Thank you. So, in terms of how we respond to change at work, some very brief bullets that I've took here. So, at work we expect change. Change happens on a daily basis. The person who noted this said that they're actually quite relaxed and that they're used to it. There were notes about changes is usually welcomed by some people. There's an opportunity to affect change at work, which people rather enjoyed. And they were looking at the whys. So what are the benefits? Why is it that change can bring additional benefits to the way that we work, et cetera, et cetera? Someone else suggested, what's in it for me? They kind of wanted to know what the impact on change would be on them, to take on new skills and learn, take it all on board, and obviously to take any concerns that they had to managers, et cetera. So that was quite important with regards how they respond to change. Kubler Ross was another thing that we brought up. And then another thing is, in work environment, you're trying to still build up relationships and have a psychologically safe environment. So that was impactful as well. In terms of why we respond differently, we don't expect change as much outside. There's much more normal and a safe environment outside of work. It's easier, and there's support mechanisms. There's a confrontational aspect is easier outside of work. You can always just walk away. 2 notes from myself. So we've got people we choose to be around outside of work, so it's safer. There's also longer relationships, so they're more well developed, and there's more freedom in our interactions, and there's more constraints at work. So it's fear of losing a job, there's stress, etc., at a time.
Obviously, thank you. Okay, was there anyone else who hasn't shared or played back? Got room for just one more, if there's anybody. If not, I'm more than happy for us to now make a start. So thanks for spending that time, just sort of collaborating and sharing views and, talking about the word change. The interesting thing about the word change is the fact that it's something that occurs to every single one of us every single time. We change our clothes. Sometimes we change our cars. Sometimes we change our houses. Sometimes we change things. And the word change itself is a word that brings about change. So tonight, our focus, or today, sorry, I shouldn't say tonight, because I'm conscious that people are in different parts of the world. So today, our focus is specifically on organizational transformation. And the word transformation itself is a form of change. So our starting point is, what exactly is organizational transformation? Okay, as we can see from this image here, we've got several aspects to an organization. But right at the center of an organization is culture. Now, before we even go any further, we have to recognize one fact. Organizational transformation is an emotional journey. Now, here's when how I start to interact with ourselves, because normally we make this conversational. If I can hear from just one person, when we hear the words emotional journey, what image does that connote for us? Just one person, emotional journey.
For me, it's painful.
Painful. That's deep. Thank you. So, the journey of a transformation is full of emotions. Okay, but it's a journey similar to a road that is littered. All sorts of organizations undertake transformations for whatever reason, which we're going to have a look at soon. Okay, but along the way, along that journey, there's lots of litter on that road. And what kind of litter are we talking about? Has anyone here ever seen beautiful litter? Not quite. Many times we drive along the motorway and you just see streams of litter on the way. And you actually think, my goodness, people actually create that litter. It's the same thing with an organizational transformation. failed transformation are commonplace. Why do they fail? People are at the heart of transformation. But what tends to happen when you have a failed transformation? You end up with litter pickers. Someone has to pick up the litter. And you actually see them on the road. Sometimes you have highway maintenance vehicles making sure that they are safe. But we have to consider that the litter that is created is someone else's job to mop up. And this is exactly the same with organizational transformations, especially the ones that are not successful. Groups of people or individuals have to step in to pick up that litter. And, you know, I jokingly say typically that's where professional coaches come in to mop up. Now, when we talk about the emotional journey, here is a typical scenario of failed transformations. And in a lot of cases, it's down to the leaders to champion the transformation. So, in a situation where you have leaders define the objectives, they design a project plan, the leaders agree on the KPIs, and then the leaders recruit the right people. The executives now turn around later on, and when they look at the failure of the transformations, they consider that the rates of failure are quite high. But if you think about what we've just gone through in those bullet points, the leaders actually do all these things. The leaders define the objectives for the transformation. They design a project plan. They more or less do everything. And then they expect other people to pick up and deliver a successful transformation. And when things don't work the way they expected, they actually now feel a little bit alarmed and say, oh, these failure rates are quite high. Now, in recent times, there was a research, a collaborative research that was done between Ernst & Young and Oxford University. And their objective was to investigate what it takes to lead a successful transformation. Now, before I actually go any further, by show of hands, either physical hand or you can use the virtual hand, how many people have been involved in any form of transformation? Loads. Wow. Loads. And with those that we've seen, maybe we can use the chat here, typical success rates in terms of percentages. So if we just use blocks of percentages, 25, 50, 75, 100%, what kind of response of people, what kind of response, success rates of people typically experienced? In the chat, or you can come off mute. Anyone? Any suggestions? 25, yeah, 25. And to be quite honest, 50% seems to be the average that a lot of organizations tend to have. Ballpark, the standard in the industry would normally be the expected rate of 75%. But approximately 50% of those surveyed, of the leaders surveyed, responded that their transformation was successful, and the other 50% said theirs were unsuccessful. One of the most important findings indicators that for a transformation to be successful, leaders must approach it in ways that are designed to mitigate emotional harm, to drive emotional commitment from the people, i.e., get the people involved. Now, how best can leaders do this to actually make sure that their approach is empathetic enough to alleviate the emotional pain? And the simple answer is to engage coaches to bring them to the rescue. Now, I actually just saw a chat that said, what's it that Mike said again? Could graffiti be considered beautiful litter? In a typical Agile form, I would say it depends. And that's the short answer that I will give at this stage, because we will have more to come later. Graffiti, one person's graffiti is another person's criminal damage. Let's put it that way. But more of that to come. Thank you. Okay. So what do coaches do? They help maintain the momentum for the long journey ahead. I think if we remember when we started, we said that when you think about emotional journey, someone said that it reminds them of a painful journey. And when you think about pain, all you want is someone to help you manage the pain, manage that endurance that is much required. So when we talk about organizational transformation, we take a systemic approach. I mean, if you look at the image that we are sharing on the screen here, a typical transformation touches several parts of the whole organization. And from my experience with transformations, certainly from my recent experience as well, there are tendencies to focus on one part of the organization to transform and then ignore the other parts of the transformation. But the reality of transformation is that you've got to look at it as an ecosystem. You've got to look at the organization as a whole. And the organization is simply made up of parts that need to be transformed at the same, probably not the same time, but certainly at the same pace and with the same objective, so that they can actually achieve the organizational goal. Now, organizations typically have the same type of questions. They have, how can my organization be more responsive, more flexible, and more agile to fast-moving trends? How can we actually respond to consumers better? How do we make sure that we remain competitive? How do we embed a culture of pace to keep up with the dynamics of innovation? I started a new role recently in data analytics and AI, which seems to be one of the growing sectors of organizations now, especially with the digital world. And one of the questions that keeps coming up within my area of work is, how will AI, automation, and machine learning redefine jobs in our organization? Because it will have an impact on the people. Now, the reality of it is that if any organization wants to start the journey, before they actually get on that emotional journey, they need a lot of guidance, a lot of support, and a lot of involvement of coaches. And what do the coaches do? They simply help the companies when they design and adopt new organization models and make sure that they have a systemic view, a systemic approach, and they help to lead and shape the markets in which they operate. So, a good starting point, honestly, is not what lots of organizations do. We've seen so many companies, they just go ahead and they start making changes without addressing the mindset shift. The mindset shift is actually what determines the strategy. Transformation in itself requires a strategy. The goal of the transformation is to allow the organization to collectively, as we saw in the previous slide, the whole system collectively define and measure the new behavior constructs that allow the organization to pivot, to inspect and adapt, to respond. And then to find the balance between the opposites that we've got here. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on these opposites now, but what I will do is just kindly just contrast the left and the right, because later on, I've got another slide that shows exactly these dimensions, okay? But from a different perspective. So we need to ensure the organizations need to find the balance between these opposites. First of all, profit versus purpose. What is more important? Profitability or to have a sense of purpose? Obviously, profitability will help them in the short term, but when we look at it from the context of a transformation, the purpose is more important. In the same way, when we look at hierarchies, we think about silos. On the other hand, when you look at networks of people, the connectivities and the communication patterns that evolve, then you can judge which one will be better. The third one, you've got here controlling, contrasted with empowering. Empowering people is fundamental to the success of a transformation. And then you've got planning versus experimentation. Now, again, without wanting to name any organization, I've experienced an organization going through, let me call it, a way of working transformation. Some people call it Agile, some people call it something else, but it's a way of working transformation. And they're trying to move away from what you could describe as a waterfall type of working to a more cadence-based style. But the mindset is still one that requires them to plan in detail, micro-level planning, all the way through to making sure that everything that is executed was previously planned. The flip side to that is when you have experimentation. When you have experimentation, it allows people to actually be more creative and innovative, okay? And then the last point there is privacy versus transparency. Where you have privacy, you have secrecy, and people don't basically know what's going on. But in order for any transformation to succeed, you need that level of transparency that helps everybody to see what's going on. So that was, what is transformation in a nutshell? Now, let's have a quick look at why organizational transformation. Now, the sad situation, and it pains my heart to say this, the sad situation is that in today's world, it has become a buzzword and it's big business. Big business for certain types of organizations who don't have a compelling reason to embark on a conversation, on a transformation, but because everyone else is doing it, it looks cool, therefore, let's do it, okay? So, if they're doing it for the big business reason, they've got things wrong. Some of the reasons for transformations could be driven by technology. We've seen the drive towards digital transformation. We've also seen how society has been transformed because of climate change. And we know that society is now going through a radical transformation in so many respects. All we need to do now is look at the automobile industry, the transport industry. There's now a huge drive to reduce carbon emissions, and we've now seen a lot of electric vehicles. Future generations will wonder, you mean you actually used to put fuel inside a car? You must have been absolutely crazy. To them, it would be totally illogical, but that is a transformation that is happening as a result of climate change. Now, we also have had some situations that we've had to respond to. 2 years ago, when COVID-19 started, the whole world was taken aback because no one was prepared for it. But we had to respond. Almost every organization on the face of the earth had to transform. Individuals had to transform. I'm pretty sure that if we were to be told that we should stay at home and not go out for 2 days before COVID, people would say, absolutely no way, nothing can bring that about. But we could see how transformation occurred in our personal lives. Now, sadly, we're now also witnessing transformations due to political situations. You've got the situation in Ukraine, and then just a week ago, we started to witness another transformation in China. Now, talking about political turbulence, we have actually seen, society reformed as a result of protests. People who remember the Berlin Wall when it came down, and when we think about the Soviet Union, how it was disbanded, all of that is transformation, societal transformation. Now, if we come back and look at organizational transformation, it requires a business strategy to change management, which is intended to move the organization from where they currently are, the current state, to a future state. Now, everything that we talk about from a transformation perspective could simply be put in that single box. And that box, we can see here, is change. And it's change that happens. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's unconscious, sometimes it's subconscious. But what we know is that it must take place. And then when we look at some other reasons for transformation, it could be a need to transition from bricks and mortar to e-commerce. Now, I'm old enough to remember the days before the internet, when if you wanted to buy something, you actually go to a shop to buy Waterstones. There are so many bookstores that I remember going to visit if I wanted to buy a book. Along came the internet, along came e-commerce, and now you want to buy a book, you click on Amazon, you get the book delivered to your doorstep. That is a form of transformation. Organizations may choose to rebrand their website or simply rebuild it. Or it could be an organizational rebranding, change of strategy. They might be launching a new department, and believe it or not, they may be embracing diversity and inclusion. Now, I can see in the audience here, we've got Mary Lanion. And I've been on Mary's podcast a number of times to talk about diversity and inclusion. We can't talk about transformation without bringing up subjects such as George Floyd and how organizations responded to what happened in the United States. Simply because of the murder of that person, they had to now introduce new policies that address diversity and inclusion. And at the root of that inclusion of new policies, they had to transform a lot of things within the organization. And these are the kind of things that happen that require coaches before they can actually do successfully. Now, I've got here going digital. Need I say more? We're now living in the digital world. Lots of organizations have embraced the digital transformation as a way that by which the organization has to pivot. It could simply be changing the hierarchies from silos-based working to cross-functional teams, self-organizing, empowered teams. They cannot deliver that successfully without having a structured transformation approach. And, they have the customer at the back of their minds, they have a fast feedback loop. All of these require concerted efforts. Now, all forms of transformation involve a form of cultural change, people change. Organizations that are product-led, and I'm actually yet to see an organization that isn't product-led. Any form of service that is provided is a form of a product. Infrastructure, technology, processes, complex organizational change can involve all of these. And if it's not addressed with the right approach, it's going to be in that 25% that we talked about earlier on. So let's move on. What is required for any successful transformation is to make sure that they are started properly, engage the right people. And I'm going to come to who are the right people later. But in whatever shape or form, the right people who are engaged would actually take the organization on that journey for transformation, because it's a gradual process, requires a great deal of patience, and typically you need a roadmap before the transformation can even start, so that you can define that journey and what it would look like. Okay, we got here that executives, academics, and consultants can all relate to these statements. The rate of failure in transformations is still far too high, and organizations can simply not afford to spend a great deal of money on transformation and then scrap it. Can I just ask someone, what typically happens to whoever sponsored that transformation that fails? What typically happens to, maybe the CEO, the CFO, from people's experience? You can come off mute, you can share in chat.
Typically, they would lose their job.
Absolutely. Someone always ends up losing their job, no matter who. It could even be the CEO. So rather than lose the job, all they need to do is get the engagement right in the first instance. What do they need to do to make sure they don't lose their job? Engage a professional coach, and they can target the culture as the starting point. Make sure that change is introduced incrementally. Too much too soon often ends in disaster. Coaches will partner with the organization and the senior leadership through the transformation and ensure that they achieve the desired outcomes. Now, when we talk about the role of coaches in the transformation, they actually act as change agents. They act as facilitators. They possess the expertise and the experience which helps them achieve extraordinary results. I'm a firm advocate of bringing in external coaches, because number one, they can be as objective as possible without being emotionally attached to any person or any part of the organization. We know what typically happens in organizations, the politics, the loyalties, the favoritisms. But when you have professional coaches that are engaged externally, they come in, they have no loyalty anywhere. They have an obligation to do the right thing and the right job. Now, we talked about a transformation roadmap earlier, and typically this is what it looks like. Identify the change, organize the project, involve and invite the influential stakeholders, and then throughout the implementation stage, they've got to maintain a consistency. They've got to monitor it. They've got to keep the pace of change. They've got to make it gradual. And this is what coaches are best at doing. Now, I'm going to whiz through here just some forms of, typical examples of transformations. And I'm pretty sure that, almost everyone here is well experienced in these. So I'm not going to turn this into too much of a deep dive. So I'll whiz through these. So we have a cultural transformation that looks at changing the ways of working. We have IT systems, and more recently, digital transformations. And these basically look at ways of changing the technology stack, embracing new technologies. Now, again, I remember mainframes. Again, can I ask people to please show their hands if they've ever worked in a mainframe environment. The good old days of mainframe architecture. Now, is it better now with cloud technologies and APIs? Is that better than mainframe? Any thoughts?
It's
So,
different.
Femi,
It
It's
is
different.
better. It's different. And of course, if you find yourself in an organization where some parts are still quite on the old technology, you see the pain, a lot of pain.
Yes, you do. But you know, the thing is, it's different. You know, it's all about perspectives. A lot of organizations, it depends on what they're doing. But to compete in today's world, to survive in today's technology and the competitive market, a lot of organizations are recognizing the fact that they've got to transform their IT systems. They can't even be using data centers and survive, or rather compete. So there's been the drive to cloud technologies. So a lot of things are happening. But as we know, any form of transformation requires heavy investment. And you can't just spend a lot of money in one go. Hence the need to actually incrementally and over a period of time transform. So there's a lot here about, you know, digital transformation. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. And by the way, I will make the slide deck available, Imran, David, so by all means you can share it with people after, because I'm going through details so people can sort of look at in their own time. So management transformation. Here's another thing that's happened in the last 20, 30 years. I do remember the days of MBOs, management buyouts. It seemed to be the order of the day then. And then we had a period of acquisition and mergers. And when one company acquires another company or merges with another company, what's the first thing that happens? Restructuring. A restructuring is a form of transformation. So when you have management transformations, it's typically something that involves, you know, changing the entire organization, changing to societal or environmental requirements, alignment with a new reality. Management transformation is a prerequisite which is based on sharing information, explaining and persuading, with the aim of ensuring a more comprehensive change within the company, whether it's, you know, changing two separate companies and merging them into one, or whether, you know, it's a leveraged buyout or anything of that nature. It's all done within the context of making change within the company. Now, the next one I've got here is an operational transformation. Now, this is quite a funny one, because when we talk about transformations that take place within the organization, sometimes we look at it from the context of the internal aspects of productivity within the organization. But operational transformation involves redesigning the organization's structure, their mode of operation, professional practices that enable it to work differently and more efficiently. It's a continuous and evolving process where the focus is on the employees, because they are the ones who operate the company. And for any operational transformation, the leadership of the organization must be supportive and they must be committed to ensure success. I think this is the last one. Yes, this is the last one, transformation of business processes. Now, I do recall many years ago when I worked for Barclaycard, we had a program that was called BPR, Business Process Reengineering. And I remember that was when two-factor authentication started to become a thing. And in order for two-factor authentication, which eventually became multi-factor authentication, in order for 2FA to work, they had to transform their end-to-end processes of the card processing authorization processing, simply because they wanted to use two-factor authentication. The whole business process had to be re-engineered. So transformation of business processes consists of moving from a function-oriented vertical vision to a business-oriented transversal vision. And it typically involves automating or securing various repetitive, low added value tasks. I can draw so many different examples of streamlining, rationalizing of business processes. And whichever terminology we want to use, they're all one form of transformation or another. And the whole objective of business process transformations is to increase productivity and ensure that there's increased competitiveness. Now, professional coaches have one advantage. They do not need domain expertise. All they need to do is help identify the best options that will optimize both the business process transformation and the corporate strategy. And oftentimes the result is strengthening the company's competitiveness and increasing its business agility. Now, a word of caution here. Engagement and empowerment of the people must take center stage in a transformation of this nature. I referred to the time when I was at Barclaycard, and business process reengineering typically involves going to observe people, and then you create swim lanes, and you create a business model of how they currently operate. I tried to engage with some business stakeholders, and they will not tell me what was going on. They will not tell me, they will not share what the business processes were. Now, I'm going to ask, can anyone think of why there was resistance or lack of cooperation, specifically with business process transformation? Any thoughts? David?
Were they scared of the
Of what?
potential change? Maybe they would lose some control.
Lose control and also job losses. As soon as people start to think about rationalization of business processes, the first thing that would come to mind is, oh my goodness, I might lose my job. If I don't tell them what I do, maybe my job will be safe. But the whole point about having professional coaches involved is that they're able to coach the situation. They're able to facilitate, they're able to manage, they're able to orchestrate the requirements that will be needed for the transformation to be successful. So, especially with business process transformation, it's not a one-time activity, it's continuous. They've got to keep on revisiting the business processes time and time again. Yeah. I'm going to just change my gear a little bit now and start looking more about the coaching aspect of things. All forms of transformation, we've just seen a number of them. It's not by any means limited to the ones that we've looked at. There are so many other types, but we just keep it to those ones. All forms of transformations are essentially a universal call to action. And whenever we have a call to action from an organization perspective, there is always one thing that is needed. Always one thing. Coaching involvement. Evolving trained within the profession of coaching contributes towards answering the call to action that organizations need in order for them to succeed with their transformation. Now, when we talk about the coaching call to action, typically we have several examples. Leadership coaching, transformation coaching in itself. Now, believe it or not, there are so many professional coaches whose remit is actually specifically transformation coaching. That on its own is a transformation journey within professional coaching. You also have coach supervision, team and business coaching, technological and artificial intelligence coaching. And then there's also the need within the call to action to have social return on investment and the ability to measure impacts. And the last one that I put there is neuroscience insights. Can anyone think of, again, this is kind of me just trying to see how we're kind of on this same journey together. When we talk about neuroscience insights, what's the significance of that neuroscience insight within organizational transformation? Any thoughts, please?
I'm thinking of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. And there's one more that you can add to that. When you hear neuroscience, what does it typically conjure in the mind? What does neuroscience typically relate to?
How the brain works.
How the brain works. And the brain is part of who?
The people.
Absolutely. Thank you. So this is a trick one that we normally slot in when we sort of deal with leadership. When we bring in something that they cannot connect to or connect with easily, we now have to break it down. Now, from my experience, I've heard leaders say 1 million times that people are at the heart of our transformation. And guess what, when you observe what goes on? Typically, who is the one thing they disregard?
People.
People. Every organization says it. We care about our people. And guess what? The people have no idea of what goes on. So typically, when you bring in something that enables them to actually think twice, to see how does that relate to people. Neuroscience relates to people. Just one of several ways that we can use neuro-linguistic programming to make them connect. So, we talked about this earlier on. Organizational transformation is not something that we do and we say we're done. We might have a definition of done for organizational transformation, but we are never done. It's continuous. Change is continuous. We have to make it an opportunity and not a liability. There's this organization, I don't know whether people have heard of Conferry. It's a consultancy. They have coaches, they have consultants. Conferry report indicates that change is a constant and continuous process for all organizations these days, which means organizations are likely implementing change management strategies all the time. As soon as they've finished with one, they constantly re-implement and revise in their change management strategies. If the change processes do not consider what people need and fail to put people at the center of the transformation, all the transformation efforts will simply go to waste. Change isn't linear and it's not static. It's interesting when we talk about an organization as a whole. There are times that organizations will just pick one and say, all right, we're going to do that one. It has to be structured in a way that it touches on all aspects of the organization and it's continuous. Organizations must embrace continuous transformation. They must remain agile, resilient, and flexible so that they can anticipate future change and respond accordingly. But change isn't just a matter of transforming processes and technology. To achieve successful change, organizations must strive to build people-centric organizations. Now, if there's anything that I constantly emphasize as my mantra, as my own personal mantra, I always talk about the people side of things. People first. Here's a summary of John P. Cotter, where he indicated 8 reasons why typically transformations fail. Okay, and this applies to organizations of various sizes, large organizations such as Ford Motors and smaller organizations such as Lancet Communication, they tried and sometimes they fail. So why do they fail? If it's as easy as I've made it sound, why do typically companies still fail? So we've got 8 steps here. John Cotter's 8 steps. So when they fail to establish a great enough sense of urgency, when they don't have a powerful guiding coalition, when they lack a vision, when they under-communicate the vision by a factor of 10, when they don't remove obstacles to the new vision. Now, that one is actually the most significant in my perspective. Before embarking on any transformation, every organization has obstacles one way or another. Before starting the transformation, those obstacles need to be identified and isolated to smoothen the journey. It's a little bit like if there's a tanker blocking the motorway and you want to have a smooth journey. Of course, you're going to have to stop. You're going to get someone to remove the tanker. So it'll be better to actually get that tanker out of the way first. Okay? Not systematically planning for and creating short-term wins. Now, again, I've seen this happen in organizations that I am very familiar with. They aim for massive, complex solutions. What could they do differently? Any thoughts?
Well, they could try starting smaller.
Absolutely.
And then growing out from there.
And that's where scaling comes in. Start small, scale up. And typically, when you lay a solid foundation and you start to scale up, you're simply improving and replicating what you've done on a smaller scale. But of course, you're learning as you go along. And each time you learn and improvise, you're improving the chances of overall success. Thank you very much, David. Declaring victory so soon. Oh, I've seen this happen so many times. They've not even gone 6 months and they're celebrating the successful transformation, only to find out 12 months later that they've just wasted their money. So don't declare the victory too soon. Wait, continuously build. And then the final one is not anchoring changes in the corporate culture. Okay? So looking at all these, professional coaches are there to guide the process. What's the role of the professional coach in organizational transformation? I seem to overemphasize the leadership aspect of things. Why is that? Why is it that leadership seems to always feature when we talk about transformations?
We often say without leadership, things will not hold, right? It wouldn't be successful.
Yeah, it starts with the leadership.
Yeah.
They are the ones who set the vision, and they are the ones who are responsible for delivering the vision, and they are the ones who are responsible for, carrying the people along. Okay, so let's just quickly look at how the leadership of an organization could actually work with professional coaches to co-create and make sure that they actually set off on a good note. So first of all, leaders have to accept that the status quo is unsustainable. It takes a lot of courage and an ability to hold and facilitate emotionally uncomfortable conversations. And this is where coaches excel, holding difficult conversations, those powerful questions just to unearth and explore and get to the bottom of things. Leaders feel uncomfortable, but it's for their benefit. embracing the unknown and adopting a humility approach, which is required to challenge mindsets and assumptions about the organization and its current ways of working. If we don't want to accept things need to change, then we're forever going to remain where we are. Coaches would help leaders to develop a powerful and purposeful vision because it allows them, the leaders, to see more clearly what needs to change and why. Now, oftentimes when leaders, some of the bullet points we saw earlier on, that leaders define the objectives. It beggars belief that someone can set the objectives and try to assess those objectives themselves. Segregation of duties, working with the coach, setting those objectives, and then working with them to evaluate so that they can have a better assessment is a much preferable approach. Leaders lead emotional transformation. We've said that several times today. Exploring topics such as anxiety, fear of the unknown, that psychological safety space that we mentioned earlier on, and also ideas about the future states and bringing them into formal conversation creates opportunities for the leaders to work through them instead of just feeling and creating resentment. We've seen it happen with so many leaders. When they are confronted with challenging situations, they either bypass it or get rid of that completely, which is an evasive technique. But with coaches, they're able to make them, hold a mirror to their face and make them confront those fears that they have. Another point here is that they're able to include both the rational and the emotional. Now, I'm going to ask a question, and the question relates to rational and emotional. The first question is one word, and please kindly tell me which of the two, rational or emotional, this relates to. Okay, the first one is heart. And the second one is head. Okay, Mary says heart is emotional. What about head?
Rational.
Rational. It's, leadership tends to go on the rational quite a lot. ROI, payback period, productivity, metrics, OKRs, which is fine. But all of that comes from the head, the rational. But what about the heart, the emotional side of things? Sometimes the leaders themselves don't appreciate that they need to consider the emotional side of things. But professional coaches are able to facilitate conversations, either one-on-ones or in small groups or in problem-solving workshops, so that they can address the emotional side of things. And then they need to consider the benefits of focusing on the emotional journey, which will come by aligning KPIs, funding, resources, and people. Again, alignment of people to everything else. Making transformation the new normal. Now, this is where we're now beginning to see the benefits, yeah? When that transformation is now the new normal, where command and control is now out of the window, but transformation brings about new cultures, new mindsets, and new ways of working. Give employees the information and the resources they need. Empower them to develop and innovate in other directions. And this will promote a disruptive mindset. Now, I've got just a few slides left, but I'm not going to go into too much detail about those ones. What I intend to do is actually now go back to examine, because we've talked about professional coaching extensively. So what exactly is professional coaching? ICF definition of coaching actually says that it's partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process and that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. So, the role of the coach focuses on setting goals, creating outcomes, and managing personal change or organizational change. Now, in terms of their role, the coach helps in discovery, clarification, and alignment, encourages self-discovery, encourages or elicits client-generated solutions and strategies, and holds the client responsible and accountable. When we talk about professional coaching, there are basically 3 main professional coaching bodies across the globe. You've got the International Coaching Federation, ICF, you got EMCC, and you got Association for Coaching. Between the 3 of them, they form the Global Coaching Mentoring Alliance. And what I personally consider is beneficial for organizations is to make sure that when they are engaged in professional coaches, they look at the accreditation and the association they have. Of course, it doesn't mean that these are the only levels of professional coaching. From an Agile coaching perspective, there's a whole raft. You've got Scrum Alliance, you've got Scrum.org, you've got ICII, you've got Scaled Agile Framework. They are also all levels of coaching. But from the professional coaching perspective, we tend to look at those 3 because they have a model which is built on values and ethics and competencies. So in the slides that you're going to be seeing later on, there's a lot more about each of these 3 dimensions, which I'm not going to go into tonight, but please take time to read about them later on. So I'm just going to bring us now to the home stretch and talk about the final part of it, okay? How do we know when an organization has changed successfully? And there's this quote by Albert Einstein, not everything I'll start again. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. There are sometimes what people call the soft aspects, the non-visible aspects that you don't actually quantify. And this is what we were talking about earlier on when I shared the slides about the left and the right. We need to move from more predictability to less predictability. Less predictability of purpose, networks, empowerment, experimentation, and transparency. When an organization is more on the right than on the left, then they have a very, very good chance of having been seen to transform. Okay? Coaches offer all of these to make things happen. They create new organization models. They reinvent structures. They transform mindsets. They develop new capabilities, and they understand how to change workplace to foster collaboration. And they start small, they test and learn, they scale up. We talked about that earlier on. They prove value, they measure success, and they win the employees' hearts and minds. So when an organization has transformed successfully, this is what you see, the end result. Organizational change is manifested by improved productivity, greater efficiency, reduced costs, improved employee satisfaction, new opportunities, and increased ROI. And finally, the end result is that great collaboration, improved learning experience, ability growth, skills, training, competencies, and knowledge. And that, in my opinion, is how we can ensure that through professional coaching, we can lead an organization to a successful transformation. Thank you so much for listening to me today. And I don't know whether we got time for questions and answers. Only 5 minutes left.
There are quite a few in the chat. David, you want to take over? I might leave in between. Thank you, Femi,
Okay.
very much. I need to
Thank
leave
you
for
very
home
much,
now.
Imran.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Imran.
David, please
Yes,
take over. Bye.
Okay.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
thank you. Okay, so there are some questions in the chat. If people want to come off mute and ask their question, then please do. Does anybody want to jump in with their question now?
I have a quick one because I have to drop off. I think you did mention how they prefer stuff to the soft, the rational to the, compared to the emotional. Could that be responsible for the reasons why they start the transformation without a consideration for professional coaching first, but rather it is an afterthought, which is why they come into the later sometimes?
From my experience, the analogy of litter that I shared at the start is exactly the point you've just made. For so many reasons, organizations tend not to consider bringing in help at the right time until things go wrong. And it happens time and time again. Coaches tend to go in and mop up and clean up after someone else has created an absolute shambles. So yes, you're quite right.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a great presentation. I have to do.
Thank you very much. There are a few questions in chat. Duncan asked, how do I compare and contrast a coach to a management consultant in transformation? The reality of it is, Duncan, as you and I know, coaches wear multiple hats. The consultant hat is one where they bring in their expertise and they simply tell the organization what needs to be done. From the coaching perspective, they engage and explore and come up with the best fit rather than telling. Of course, there's nothing wrong with telling, but only if you've got the right answer and the right context, which sometimes we simply don't know at the beginning. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. I guess I see more of the reliance on the management consultant because they want to be told this is what you will get and this is why it makes sense. And I see less reliance or credence given to the coaching side of it.
Yeah. Thank you. So Tara asked a question. How do you know if the emotional journey has been successful? I guess it can't be measured. Is Tara still with us?
I am. Hello.
How are you, Tara?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Now, what have I just done here? Now,
You've asked me how I am.
exactly. That answers the question.
I guess what I mean is that potentially, I guess it depends how you get the feedback, I guess, in a one-to-one session or a round table.
Yep.
I guess my impression is that sometimes you're not always honest about
all of the above. Metrics, surveys, questionnaires. There's so many ways. But there's one way that we can never, ever, ever be deceived. And it's by asking objective questions. Again, as a coach, I'm trained to ask objective questions that would actually measure people's true feelings.